All right, so today is Wednesday, May 7th, 2025. This is Lou Story representing the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives as a volunteer from the Learning Center Senior Citizens, Inc. I'm interviewing Jim Janson for the Everyone Has a Story project through the Savannah Community Memory Project. We're conducting this interview at my home. Thank you for joining us today. If you could say your full name.
Yeah, Lou, thank you. My name is, I'll do the formal, James T. Janson. The T stands for Theodore, which was my dad's first name. Yeah. So before I left, my wife, Eileen, was talking to one of our daughters, Annie, and she said, Dad's going to be coming in and doing this project, and he's probably going to talk all about growing up in the 50s, because I talk a lot about that. And I have so many great memories of that time period. I was born, by the way, in 1947. And I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. And when I was about 2 or 3, around 1950, my parents and I moved out to Solon, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, about half hour away. And so I grew up there. Yeah, it was great. It was a small town. And I have so many good memories of that time period. Also in the 60s when I went to high school and also undergraduate, the 60s and all of that. Particularly because of the great music. Love all the music. I'm a big rock fan. I still listen to, in fact, I was listening to some of it on the way here. Beatles, it's so amazing, Beatlemania. I saw the Beatles in 1966 in Cleveland and was fortunate to see a lot of the groups back at that time, the Stones, Bob Dylan, Crosby, Stills and Nash. Temptations, if you want a little Motown, get into the Temptations, Peter, Paul and Mary, and Led Zeppelin. And the Led Zeppelin story is pretty cool, to be sure. I was ready to graduate from Ohio University in Athens, Ohio in 1969. And there was a concert in May. I was going to graduate in June, and this concert in May at our new convocation center, large convocation center. And the headliner, and I won't tell you who it is right yet, all right? But the opening act was a group called Led Zeppelin, and we didn't know who the heck Led Zeppelin was, because they just started. That's when that first album of theirs came out called Led Zeppelin with the Hindenburg, a great photograph on it and all of that. So we thought, but we were there for the headliner, all right? And the headliner is someone who's still alive, and maybe a lot of people aren't familiar with him as far as his name, but as soon as I say, do you know this song he did? Feliz Navidad, Feliz, So it was Jose Feliciano, who within that year had a big #1 kind of folksy version, slow version of the Doors' Light My Fire, and I think it went to #1. It was very good, actually. And so we thought, okay, we'll see Jose, and we'll see Led Zeppelin, whoever that is. And of course, Led Zeppelin comes on, and everyone goes wild, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant, et cetera, et cetera. And it was pretty cool to see them, to be able to see them. One other great thing on campus, as far as the music is concerned, and this was when I was, I think in my second year there, around 1966 or so. And the Grateful Dead were playing in Columbus, Ohio, at Ohio State University, which is probably about an hour away from Athens. And so apparently we got the buzz around campus that they had a day off after their concert there, and they were going to come to OU for a free concert. So we all, first come, first serve. And that was before the Convocation Center was built. And it was in our smaller Memorial Auditorium, which held only 500 people. So myself and my roommate, Denny Dormady, we, beelined over to Memod, and we were able to see the Dead in concert. And that was free. It's pretty cool. I mean, to see these legendary groups and they still have following today is really neat. So, those are the kinds of things that I like. I am an art historian, so I've always loved history. Growing up in Solon, that is. I was an adventurer. I loved history. I loved to read about the explorers, any type of history. And the one thing I love about history is the fact that you can tell me about, something from Japan or this country, that country. There's just so much to learn. Not that I'm going to remember everything, but it's really very fascinating. Yeah. So, so I did the things in Solon that all of us did at that time. It's so different than it is today. And I always hate to say, well, back in my day but it was different. That is for sure. It was different. Jump on your bike in the morning and drive all around Solon and other places without fear of anything, really. I had great parents. My dad, Ted Janson. My mom, Marge Janson, and they were wonderful. I had a great childhood. You see and hear about kids these days, or other days, as a matter of fact, where they've had to go through so many struggles. And when I was growing up, I thought, oh, everyone's had a great time like this. And, it was the 50s, too, a little more quieter time. But, yeah, so I had a great, and I love to read. I still read all the time. These days, though, when I start reading, I start nodding off, but that's the way it is at this point. But I loved, my mom saw that, so she would buy me the Hardy Boy series. I have about almost 40. And what's cool about that, those have the original dust covers still on them. And I always used to put my name in it, sign it. And I think the earliest ones were around 1955. There was also a series called Tom Swift Jr., who was the son of Tom Swift fame, earlier time. And it was my next door neighbor, Mr. Dvorak. I used to pal around with his son. His son's name was Jim, just like mine, but he had a grandmother, Mrs. Roach, who lived with them. And Mrs. Roach used to call him her jolly boy. You know how grandmothers do that. And so we used to call him Jol. And I still do. He lives up in New England, somewhere, I think Vermont. And I talked to him fairly recent. It's been years since I talked to him. That's Jol, But downstairs in the Dvoraks, they had this recreation room downstairs, and they had a bookcase. And Mr. Dvorak had a lot of the original Tom Swift. And I think that really started me, turning onto that kind of kids or boys literature. Some of his books did have the dust covers. And so when the Tom Swift Jr. came, I said, okay, and my mom would get me those. There was another series called Rick Brandt, and on it goes. I still have those on the bookshelf in my home, and it just kind of sparked my imagination. It was so pretty cool. Yeah.
So when did you know that history would be an interest in, and then specifically art history?
Well, I always loved the history for some reason right from the beginning. There was a game called the Game of the Presidents. I think that's what the title was. And I was still kind of young to play it, but my parents were playing it. And I'd sit there and, they would play it with maybe neighbors or whatever. And one time a question came up and I just blurted out an answer, Japan, let's just say. And it happened to be the answer. So maybe something like that, as basic as that, kind of filtered into my mind. As far as the art history was concerned, when I was a freshman at Ohio University, I decided to major in graphic design. But the reason for that, when I was in grade school, St. Rita's grade school in Solon, Ohio, from the 1st to the 8th grades, I was pretty good at art, all this stuff, and people say, oh, that's pretty good. And I thought, okay, maybe that's the direction I'll go. But when I got to OU in the first year, at least the first year, within the first year, I looked around to see what some of the other students were doing artistically, and I thought, I don't know if I can compete with that, But at OU, I had taken a intro to art history, like Survey 1, Survey 2, Dr. Trissolini, as I remember. And just really excited me because it kind of combined my interest in history, obviously, and then also the art side of it. And then the story, when my parents came down for the first parents' weekend, I was taking them to the art building where the art history classes were taught. I was still doing studio stuff at that point. And we walked into one, this was on a Saturday, we walked into one of the classrooms, and on the chalkboard, and keep in mind, my name is Janson, Janson, and the professor probably was recommending to the kids, it wasn't an art history class, but a regular studio class, it had Janson, the history of art. And I thought, okay, there's the writing on the wall, Yeah. And then when I was a sophomore, I switched into art history. Now, there's a couple directions you could go. Teaching would be one, but also museum work as well. So I decided to go the museum route at first. I had no idea that I'd ever be a teacher, which I eventually was. And so I got my degree in art history at OU, and then just after I got married, my wife and Eileen and we had one son by that time. I went to the University of Minnesota to get a degree in museology. When I would tell people, they say, "Oh, what was your master's degree in?" And I say, "Oh, museology." Well, they would ask me what instrument I played. And I don't. I play great air guitar, by the way. And I wish I did, learn an instrument. So, and I was able to get a fellowship at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, major museum, great museum, my first, or the second year in my studies. And then we decided to move back to, no, not yet. Then I'm looking for a job after that. I had no idea I was going to go for a PhD, because if you want to teach, that's a pretty good thing to get. But I wanted to be into museum work because I loved it. Again, to combine my interest in history and also the visual arts and all of that. So we decided to move back to Cleveland, where we're from, obviously. And I was hoping to get a job in museum education at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Again, a magnificent museum. So I was able, believe it or not, I was able to get in to see the director, Sherman Lee. These days, trying to get into you have to go through all these other things. You never get to see the Top Gun. Mm-hmm. And so, and he was one of the really noted museum art director, museum directors in the country, and even worldwide. He was a specialist in Asian art, because Cleveland has a magnificent Asian art collection. So I was in his office, and he said, "Well, we don't necessarily have anything in the education department." Oh, and then he looks, he goes, "Oh, wait a minute, there's an opening here at the Detroit Institute of Arts as a museum educator." He said, "It's for the head of the department." He said, "You probably, because you don't have a lot of experience yet, but go ahead and, try that out anyhow." And so I wrote a letter to them with my, CV, the whole thing, and went up there to be interviewed, and actually got to be an assistant curator of education. Again, a tremendous museum. Has all the really cool stuff in it and all of that. So that was 1976. And that was my first job in the field. So to be there, first job in the field at, major International actually Museum was really great. So I was there for 6 years. Eventually, then we went back to Cleveland because Detroit at that time, or after into the 6 years, they were having some financial problems. They're actually a division of the city of Detroit. And so they were going to close one half of the museum on one day, another half on the other, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought, okay, well, we'll go back to Cleveland. So I started to explore possibly teaching, all right? Because in Detroit, there was a position at the Lawrence Institute of Technology, and they were looking for someone as part of their curriculum, like intro courses to teach, like intro art history. And I'd never taught before, and I thought, okay, because it was kind of like a side job. And I got the okay from the DIA, Detroit Institute of Arts, to go ahead and to do that on the side, kind of. I think it was on the weekends. And I kind of liked the teaching, you know. So I had a little of that in the background. So we went back to Cleveland, and I was able then to get a position, first of all, at Ursuline College. It's a women's college in Pepper Pike, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland. And I actually couldn't get a teaching position. Maybe I just said that, but not a teaching position, but I directed their art gallery, that nice art gallery, the Florence O'Donnell Wasmer Art Gallery. So I spent a couple of years there, and then a position opened at Kent State University. And this was starting to float into the 80s because I worked in Detroit from 76 to about 80, 81. So I taught at Kent State for a number of years as more of an adjunct because I didn't have the PhD, but I was still able to do that. But I also was able to direct their university gallery. So we had some really cool shows in the university gallery. It was pretty neat. But looking for other opportunities, finally we thought I saw something at Georgia Southwestern College in Albany, Georgia. Now, if you look at the map of Georgia, you know, Atlanta's up near the top. If you look to the east, Savannah, where we're right now, is over there. Albany or Albany, maybe I shouldn't say that, the accent, but that's how they said it, was over on the west side. So I did get that position there and spent a number of years there. And then in 1997, a position opened at Savannah College of Art and Design, SCAD. So I spent 22 years there teaching art history. When I got there in 97, they knew I had the museum background, and they wanted me to start a museum studies program, which I did. That's kicked off in 1998, so it's been going around for a while. And then I retired in 2019, which I think was a good time for two reasons. Probably the best reason, this was like in August of 2019. My wife was in a really terrible accident, had to spend 6 weeks in the hospital and then rehab at home, and had to be in a wheelchair and all of that. So I was around, so that was good. And also then COVID started to rear its head. And so all of the professors at SCAD had to teach virtually online, which, again, not a tech person. Lou and I discussed this before. And so I thankfully didn't have to do that. But even before that, there were some people who often said, well, why don't you go ahead and maybe teach one course a term, a couple in the classroom, one online, and no, that's not me. Because I love to be, right in front like that, yeah.
You must have seen a lot of certainly changes at the school you were teaching, also in Savannah in general during that period. What do you remember from that?
Especially in SCAD or
SCAD or whatever.
Yeah. I think SCAD would be the best, At first, and we had a great department. The art history department at SCAD was wonderful. We had like 30, and I think they still do 30 plus art historians. But the major challenge, I loved being in the classroom, like I just said, but all of the stuff leading up to it, all the paperwork, this, that. And of course, you have to do syllabi. That's fine. But my daughter Annie now teaches in they call it the acting, or is it acting department or something. She teaches choreography, and her husband Rob is in sound design at SCAD. And talking to some of the colleagues that are still there at SCAD, oh my God, the paperwork, and they've everything is just so switching names around for the courses and doing this and that, and all that technical stuff, which again, I can't take, and
that used to be less in the beginning?
Oh yeah, definitely, for sure. So, but I loved being there. It was such a great place to work in the Savannah environment. And in the museum courses, what's really neat about that, and I taught museum education, we had somebody that taught curatorial and so on and so forth. I used to take students on what I call site visits, which is really field trips. I like the word site visits better. And so we were able to go to various museums and things of that sort here in Savannah and talk firsthand to the directors, the conservators, the educators, this, volunteers, this and that. And that was really pretty cool, kind of hands-on. So just as an example, let's say my classes were Monday and Wednesday, and they're 2.5 hours at SCAD. So let's say on Monday, I would teach them about the subject for that class would be tours and tour techniques. And I teach them all the little things you would do on a tour, all the strategies and so on. Then we had a follow-up visit out at Fort Pulaski. And I got to know, I got to know one of the rangers, Fort Pulaski. And I told them, I said, my class is coming. I'd like for you to give them a tour, but I don't want you to give the tour that you would give everybody, okay, this and that, but I want it to be an anatomy of a tour, all right? So what's your strategy when you first meet the people? How do you then lead them from this point to that point, and et cetera, all the little strategies. And it really worked well, for them to meet all of these professionals and give them some idea. Yeah, that worked out really well, as a matter of fact, so.
Any museums that were a favorite in the area?
Here?
Yeah.
Well, just like Fort Pulaski, we didn't go just to the Telfair, although Harry DeLorme, who is the senior educator there, has been around for a long time. Harry, I would have him come to the class and talk about the role of the educator and so on, But we went to the forts, we went to historic homes, we went to this place, we went to that place. One of the places, and I got to know many of the people in charge. I don't know if I have a direct favorite. Mighty Eighth, we went out to there because I have a real interest in World War II, actually in World War I as well. Both leading up to those wars, in between, and then the aftermath of those as well. But the Davenport House was really good. The director, Jamie Cradle, who is now at the what's it called? The Green Meldrum House. Yeah, absolutely. But what she would do, and this was an after-hours thing, she was able to. They would do a lot of historical interpretation. They dress up and that. So again, I would have the students come to, or she would have them come to the Davenport House, and she would go again through how they put these things together, and all of that, and able to ask questions, and that was pretty good. Yeah.
And any of your students you keep in touch with went on to do something similar in the field? Or?
Well, let's see, Carrie Daughtry, who is head of kind of interpretation and docents and so on at the Jepson Center at the Telfair Museums. And by the way, I don't know if you knew that she's moving into another position there, and someone else is taking over. But anyhow, so Carrie, when I retired in 2019, And a lot of times people say, oh, retirement is so good and that. Well, I don't know. I get bored a lot, And so after a while, my wife said, you need to get out in front of people. So I became a docent almost 2 years ago at the Telfair Museums. And so I called up, I said, okay, Carrie Daughtry, okay, I'll go. So I called her up and I left a message that I need some information on when I could start, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm in Food Line, doing a little grocery shopping. I get ringing up, and I said, okay, who's this? I thought I might as well take it. She goes, Dr. Janson? I go, yeah, because I do have the PhD in art history. And she goes, this is Carrie Daughtry. She said, you may not remember me, but I was a student in your class about 20 years ago as Carrie Clement. And I said, and all of a sudden I'm kind of trying to think of faces, and then I couldn't remember the name. Yeah, and so we talked, and then when I saw her again, that was a cool thing. I said, yeah, that's Carrie right there. Yeah, she's such a sweet person, to be sure. One other local, I'm not sure if she's in this position, or she may have taken a leave of absence, but at the Savannah African Art Museum, Billy Stoltz was in one of my museum education classes, and she became the director there. So those are two kind of local people that, and so I always, I kid Carrie, if she does something great, I say to her, oh, it must have been that training you had somewhere down the line, or
Take full credit.
Yeah, but jokingly, I like to joke.
Tell me more about retirement. You mentioned retirement. How has that been? What's your experience of it?
Yeah. Like I say, I get kind of bored, to tell you the truth. I did a couple years ago, I was telling you, I did write a book. It's kind of a bucket list kind of thing. It's a novella. It's geared probably to kids 8 to 10 years old. And about 80% of it is autobiographical. And it takes place between the years 1960, 1961, during the rise of NASA and the Mercury space program. And it's something, one of the main characters, but the main character really is Jimmy. Chapter number 1 is Jimmy. And that's me, actually. And I was about 12 or something at the time, and Jimmy's about the same age at the time. And it was something I wanted to do back then, but I never got it done, right? And through the book, I was able to do that. I used a lot of friends' names. One of my great friends, I grew up on Linden Drive, and the next street over in Solon was Baldwin Road. And Lee Colesbury, who went to St. Rita's with me, lived there. So I used him as a character, but I used him, or named him Lee Coles, Kolls, all right, and et cetera, et cetera. A lot of my classmates from St. Rita's School, the 7th grade teacher who I use in the book, Sister Mary Magdalene, I used her name, and so on and so forth. So, and so it was it was not difficult to write, but because it was pleasurable, because, okay, I got this incident, I remember, and to put that down. And so that really made a difference. One story from that, I loved baseball. Growing up, football's a big deal now, NBA, et cetera. But when I was growing up in the 50s, 60s, baseball in America was king. Even before that, obviously, Ruth and the whole thing. I never saw Babe Ruth, by the way, but saw some of the others. It was pretty neat. In the very first chapter, we had a drugstore. It was a Rexall drugstore. And when you go into Rexall, it's changed now. It's still kind of there, but it's not there anymore, not the way it was. And you walk down one aisle, and they had where you would get your cherry Cokes and pretzel sticks, and like a little what do they call it? soda jerk would be their kind of thing. And then right in back of it, you were on swivel chairs. You swivel around and all the candy and everything. And then all the drug parts were in one other aisle. Magazines, when you come into the right, they're all there and so on. So we loved, the kids and my friends, the boys generally, in our neighborhood loved to collect baseball cards. And Topps baseball cards were like the big deal at that time, right? Where you'd have a nickel, you can get a nickel, if I cut the grass, or my dad give me 10 cents or whatever, who knows? And so you get a couple packs of baseball cards. And you open them up and maybe there's 6 cards you look through. Okay, got this guy, don't. And then they had the hard bubble gum, the pink bubble gum and all of that. So it was getting to be, and this is how I phrased it, don't forget this is 1960 in the first chapter of Bartlett. And it was getting near the end of summer, late August, school was going to start. And I had, and this is part of the trueness of it, but in 1958, I'll tell you what I mean by that. I had almost all the cards except one, the number 1 card. It was Ted Williams, the Boston Red Sox. And nobody in my neighborhood, none of my friends had Ted Williams. We were all trying to get it. So I walked into, Lee Colesbury was with me, and Jal was with me, my next door neighbor. And so I was ready to, I spun my seat around because that's where our pharmacist, Mr. Chagrin, would put box of Topps, And so as I was ready to do that, he said, "Oh, Jimmy," he said, I have the fresh box. Now I'm going to open and put it there. And he said, "But if you want to choose," I had about 3 packs from the old box, but right there on the soda fountain, or soda top there, there's a wicker basket. And I put those 3 in there from the old pack. So if you want to choose, you could choose there, or you could do from the new box. Now, so I'm thinking, okay, new box has to have Ted Williams in there. It's near the end of the year. So I said, yeah, I'll try. So I got a couple packs. So I go outside. We had our bikes parked there like horses at a hitching post, And I open the pack, and okay, get this, nothing. All of a sudden, Lee comes running out. He goes, "I got him." And we're going, Jal was with me. And we said, "What are you talking?" He says, "I got Ted Williams." I said, "What? Come on, I was happy for him. So that incident actually happened in 1958. But the number 1 card, Early Wynn in the book, it's Early Wynn who pitched for the White Sox, used to pitch for the Cleveland Indians, now the Guardians. And so in the book, it's Early Wynn. But in the 58, the actual event, it was Ted Williams. That's what it was, Ted Williams. And Lee actually got it. And I said, "Where'd you get that?" I said, "From the new box." And he goes, "No, that wicker back." Yeah. So I was that close. But I was happy for him. So I used to joke with him, saying that, why don't you leave it to me in your will, and so on. So a couple of years ago, so I hadn't had a lot of contact with Lee. Probably last time I saw him was around 2001. We had a 60th anniversary of our 50th anniversary of our St. Rita's class, which was really cool. And 8th grade class. And so Lee calls me up and he said, "Oh, my wife Sherry and I they live in Michigan. So we're going to go down to Florida to see some friends. We'd like to stop by and see you and Eileen, spend a couple days with you guys." I say, "Hey, great. I haven't seen you for a while." So, they come over to our house, and after, hugs and all of that, and, offer them something to drink, etc., he said, "Oh, I got some stuff for you." All right, okay. So he hands me a big bottle of Michigan maple syrup, really good stuff. So, God, that's great, And then one of those little gift bags, and he said, "Here, Eileen." She goes, "Okay." So she pulls this thing out, and it was like a plastic, had like a base on it, like this, so you can put something there. And she saw the back part and said, "What's this?" turned it around. It was a Ted Williams card. I thought, oh my God, how great that was. I mean, like, it took me 60-something years to actually get that, which I thought was a real friend. I have it upstairs on my shelf. I got a shelf with all kind of stuff, you know.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. That was neat. Yeah, so good old friends.
So this will be archived, this conversation.
Yeah.
And a historian, say 100 years from now, I might be looking at it. And as a historian yourself, what would you want to tell that person about your life or about this time or whatever?
Well, you know, I'm 77 right now. And so it runs the gamut from, again, I've talked mostly about the 50s and into the করে And, you know, when you're a kid and all that, you don't have all the financial worries and that. And certainly there are children, there are kids that don't have what I had. We weren't wealthy, kind of middle class and all that. My mom was a stay-home mom, you know. My dad had a pretty good job. In fact, he had, he was a plant superintendent at a place called Air Maze. And they made filters and everything. And I think during World War II, because he wasn't in the war, but he was stateside working there, they made filters for tanks and the whole thing. You know, they would rearm and their things. So, it was just such a different. And again, I don't want to sound like, you know, back in my day, I think I said this already. But now everything's so instant and everyone knows everything about everybody, and back then you didn't, you know. And then to jump into, had great college experience in the 60s, all of that. And then I got married in 72, you know, and then we had 5 children and then trying to raise a family. And that's a bit of a struggle, you know. It's a bit of a struggle in that. But now the way things are in the world, it's just, and the world has always had, I mean, like World War II, World War I and all that, but have always had tragedies and things. And today it just seems so, so I feel I've kind of run the gamut as far as that goes, you know. But the one thing about retirement, we have 8 grandchildren, you know, and we have 5 children. My eldest son, Jim, lives in Pooler. He's not married. Then my second son, Matt, lives in, not Fort Lauderdale, I'm talking Jacksonville, with his 3 children. So they're pretty close. Jimmy's pretty close too. Meg and her husband Robert and their 2 girls, Molly and Caroline, live in Charleston, so they're pretty close. Now Meg's twin, Kate, she and her wife Michelle, they have a little boy Hudson, they live in Asheville, so that's a little further. We don't get to see them as often. And then finally Annie, who works at SCAD, I mentioned earlier, and Rob and the 2 girls, Emily and Claire, they live in Richmond Hill. So we're really close, and we have, we're able to see, and that's really cool to see them. Yeah, and we have a great dog too, Darby, English, such a great dog, English Cocker Spaniel. I love animals, maybe snakes, maybe not, I don't know. Snakes are fascinating to me if they're in a glass thing, or if they're on TV, right? I mean, they are fascinating things. But I used to tell my students, I'd break away very often in class sometimes. And I don't know, there was a time where I would ask them, I don't know how it came up, anybody have pets here, this and that. And I say, anybody have a dog? And they say, okay. And I'd ask them, what's your dog's name? I said, what about snakes? Anybody? And if someone said, I do have a snake. I said, well, unless you want to get an F in this class, do not bring the snake and hand it to me, and here's again where the memory thing, and I think being a historian, I love objects, I actually have just take that baseball card, Ted Williams, and on that shelf I have a stone from the Gard River in the south of France. There's the big aqueduct, and we were down by the river. I picked up one of the stones there, But I was showing a couple of the engravings or etchings by Francisco Goya, Spanish artist. And one of them says, "Here comes the boogeyman." And it's this like creaturey thing, and these two little girls are by their mother, and with the dark, the dark. And then I would ask the students, how many of you here still have your bear or your stuffy? They go to bed, and a lot of the kids, well, okay, I said, well, I still have mine, and it's I got it probably when I was 5 years old. It's called Boopsie Growler Bear. And one student, you don't have it. I said, yeah. I said, well, I'm going to bring it to class, and you're going to sit with that bear next class. Sure enough, I brought the bear, and then the kids really loved it. And this is a guy, a boy. And so he sat with it. It was kind of fun. Then one of the girls said, "Could I sit the second part of it?" Stuff like that. So that kind of thing, which is almost as old as I am. Still have it. I still have the ribbon that they tied, because a lot of times those things get lost, I gave it to one of my granddaughters, Claire, who's 5 now, so she has it. And things of that, like that, yeah. That's, again, I love the objects. That's what you asked about, why I liked history, I guess. And it's that kind of thing. Or traveling, you see these sites and these buildings, and, they're voting for a new pope now in the Sistine Chapel, and I've been there a couple times because I had the great opportunity to teach over there in Italy about 6 times with SCAD. We would take 2 other professors from other disciplines, but to be able to, and about 20, 25 of the students, but to be able to teach in the churches and the museums right on site. I mean, the Great Pyramid is, I think, almost 400 feet tall, and it covers an area of 13 acres, and there are about 2,000, 2,500 blocks of stone or something like that, each averaging about 2 tons a piece, and more than that. And I used to tell the students in the class, because when I teach the first part of the survey, I would say, okay, I could probably show the Great Pyramid on the wall here, blow it up. It's not even going to come close to stand. I've never seen it, though, but to stand in the shadow of the Great Pyramid and just to be there. And I have a good story about the original. One of the summers we went, because we used to go the first 3 weeks in June, we'd go to Italy 2 weeks. At the beginning it was Italy and then south of France for 1 week, but then they changed it to all Italy. So we go to Venice, Florence, and Rome. And so when we would start off with Venice up above here at Florence, then Rome. And so we would fly into Marco Polo Airport in right outside of Venice. And the college, SCAD, would have all the arrangements made there. So we had water taxis. And so you can get about 7 or 8 of us in the water taxi, but there's a little place at the back that you could stand, right, if you wanted to. So we'd roar across the bay, and then once we got into the canal areas, you had to slow down. And finally, we went to the Grand Canal, because we were heading towards where we were going to undock and where our hotel was, quarters were. And one of the Junes, beautiful day out, temperature was really great. And, you keep in mind that these students, probably most of them, at least in the States, never been out of the country, let alone they're in Venice. So I was standing in the back of the boat, and it was going slow. The other kids were here with their luggage. And, she's looking around and all the great architecture along the canal. And she looked at me and she said, "Now I know why we take art history." I said, "Yes." Someone's getting it. You see it in the site, see it in a book, and then you see it live and in color, and it just makes a difference. That, yeah, for sure. So, anyhow, but I don't know.
Okay.
Other than that, yeah,
Well.
that's me.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, I enjoyed this. This is cool.
I enjoyed it too.
My wife's heard these stories a million times, and she's okay.
Now the world will hear them.
Yes, they will. I love that. All right.
Thank you again.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Lou.